All right, so welcome to the layout portion of the CSS lecture, and this is where we can really start talking about things that we can create for real. Okay, obviously we're going to have to start with the simple things, the fundamentals. However, after this lecture, you can, in theory, build something that you would see out in the wild and out in the real world. So let's actually get into that. First, we got to talk about some of those paradigms, and we're going to talk about Flexbox here first. So what Flexbox is a layout standard, and what it's designed to do, as you can see from the video that's playing now, is that it's trying to take a series of containers and then the items within those containers and make it mobily responsive. All right, that is the job of Flexbox. So as screens get either wider or smaller in terms of width, you will be able to adjust how your content is laid out based on that screen size. However, it's limited in one direction, which is the column. So the only thing that you can do is move things down, or if you want to just give it a different width at a different position, you can do that, but it has to stay within that container. So that's a primary limitation of Flexbox. However, this has been around since about low teens for 2000, so 2012, 2013, something like that. And it's going to be probably replaced by CSS Grid. However, it works really well with CSS Grid, so it's possible that it's not going to disappear entirely, but be a complement to CSS Grid. Okay, so again, this is an example of the Aprilia site using Flexbox, but again, it's based on a series of containers, and then the children within that container that you can manipulate. All right, so over here, we got display of flex, row wrap, and then got web box sizing of inherent, which is an old style of doing this, but it is there. But this is how it looks out in the wild, actually doing it for real. So there's that. So Flexbox items, hey, developer discretion at that point. So whatever you need, whatever you're displaying, whatever the goal is, it needs to be within that container. But yeah, it's a Flexbox item. So depending on what you're trying to do, determines what you need to know or what you need to do. And this is part of the reason why development in general is difficult to pick up, is because there's no procedure. There's just a series of mental models. All right. So if we move on from here, here is a example that I did not so long ago, but it's a much simpler example than what that Aprilia site was doing. So if we look over here, we have our class of container on the DOM. Notice that we also have the class of container down here. So we're going to be addressing both of these at the same time when we're addressing class of container. So if we look back over here to the CSS, we have our dot selector, which again is a class, and then container. So container. We're going to make this display of flex. We're going to give it a flex direction of row, and we're going to wrap it. Okay, we have some other properties down here, but it's outside the scope of the topic at the moment, which is Flexbox. And then notice that we have container item down here as well. So all the children, which would be these, can be manipulated as well. So if we look at that, which here's the container items, and then we look at the result, and this is what we get. We have our magenta background, we have our container items, and then the purple, the magenta, is the container itself. So as the container is getting smaller, as soon as you run out of room, wrap that item, or wrap that child down so it can fit. And then it's going to go back up. As soon as there's room to go back on that row, it's going to pop back up. And this is how you do mobile responsiveness, or at least that's the goal of Flexbox, is to be mobily responsive. At the end of the lecture, we'll be going over media queries, which will show you exactly how to do this. But again, this is the goal of Flexbox. Here's some properties. Again, don't memorize these. Go to W3C. They have the list for you. There's no point in memorizing them, and plus, you're not going to use them, so you're going to forget anyways, even if you try to memorize it. Okay, same thing with the children properties. Go to W3C. CSS Grid. Okay, so this is relatively new. So late teens, so 2017, 2018 is when we really got support for CSS Grid. It's been around for a little bit. It was initially introduced with IE of all things. It just had a different standard to it. So the IE version of CSS Grid is very different to the version that we have now in modern browsers. So don't expect those two things to work interchangeably. All right, so what CSS Grid is trying to do, instead of doing things with a container and then just wrapping individual items within that container, CSS Grid, as the name implies, you're setting a grid based on the size of the device. And then based on the size of the device, you can place or make your grid however you want. So the primary benefit here is that you can assign particular names to areas on the grid, and then you can assign the children to that area. So this is really helpful for if you have a header or a footer or any type of navigation bar where it's more convenient to have it at the bottom for mobile and then on top for desktop, because you're fitting within those heuristics. And then for mobile, it's just physically easier to reach. So there's two different things, but CSS Grid would be a really good tool for that problem. And traditionally, it's been a challenge to do a navigation bar on the bottom for mobile and on the top for the header. It's been inefficient doing it the way that you would traditionally do it. So there's that. Okay. Here's your CSS Grid example. One thing about CSS Grid, once you get good at it, is it makes your structure a lot more simple. So up here we have our container, we have our divs, and everything is exactly the same as what it was for the Flexbox. So if I go back up to that Flexbox example, look at everything that we had to do to get that Flexbox example to work. So we have our H1, we have our div container here, we have our children, have our children, and then we have a lot of extra work to get this to function properly. So if we come back down here, notice it's a lot more simple, and it's actually more flexible as well doing CSS Grid. And again, this is part of the reason why CSS Grid is likely going to replace Flexbox. At a minimum, Flexbox will be used with CSS Grid. So you still need to know both, because both are out there at this point. So here we go. We got a container. We have our grid template row. Okay, repeat. We're telling it, hey, we want to do this multiple times. We want to do it 2 times. And then we want the width to be 200 pixels. Okay, so this is setting the row, which is going to be this from here to here, and then here to here. Okay, columns, same thing. We got to repeat. We're going to do it 3 times, and we're going to do it with 1 FR. We'll get into fractional units here in a second, but this is essentially saying we want equal spacing. All right, grid gap of 100 pixels, exactly what it sounds like. We're going to give the gap between all of our elements, all of our items, a gap of 100 pixels, and then padding of 2%. Okay. Fractional units, again, well, what we were just talking about, the formula is right here, total width minus grid gaps divided by total fractional units. That's going to give you a number if you want to know what 1 FR is. But yeah, it's a relative version of setting your, in general, it's a column size, but you can do it for rows as well. Generally don't need to unless something weird going on, but most of the time you're going to be using it for columns. Okay, CSS Grid fractional unit example. Okay, we got 1 FR, 3 times. What's that value? And it's going to depend on your screen width. So at 1920 by 1080, which is most people's resolutions at this point, that is the standard, we get a value of 700 or 573 pixels. fractional units. Don't know what else to say there. Okay, so here is the formula example. Okay, again, most of the time you're not going to need to calculate how to get this, but if you ever do, it's right here. So this is where we start talking about how do you control things if you want something to be bigger than something else. Okay, so this is one way of doing it. There's another way that I like. It's a little bit more of an advanced topic, so we'll do that a little bit later when you've had more practice. But we got to repeat here. We're going to do it 2 times. We're going to do it at 1 FR, and then we're going to give that last one 3 FR. So it's going to be whatever those fractional units are. So in this case, it's going to be 2 FR right here, and then we got 3 FR here. So we have a total of 5. So this is going to be 3/5, and these two are both going to be 1/5. So I have a visual representation here of what that would look like. And this is exactly how fractional units work. Fractional units, 3/5, 1/5. Hopefully that made sense. Okay, media queries. This is where you actually can control, and essentially what a media query is doing is going, hey browser, how big or how wide are you, or how big or wide is the device that you're running on is. And based on that, you can tell your CSS to do different things. So here's an example of that. We have our media query down here, at media screen, which you're requesting from the browser. Hey, what's the screen? And then we want the minimum width here of 800 pixels. So as we come down, this is going to hit this breakpoint here, and it's going to readdress this grid gap. Okay, there it is. So we're up here now. And notice that we have our 3FR up here. And when this video goes back up and gets this bigger again, these are going to equal out again. So that's going to be happening here in a second. And we're getting bigger now. So here we go. We're going to hit this breakpoint, which is 800 pixels. There it is. We're in this container now. And then almost immediately after, there we go. Now we're back at the desktop at 1000 pixels. Okay, hopefully that made sense as well. And that is the end of the slideshow portion. So let's actually get into the lab portion for this. We're going to do a small example of CSS for the Flexbox and then the CSS grid as well. So we're going to open up the same project that we did last time. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open with code. So we got this. I still trust myself. Okay, we're going to open this with live server. And now we got this. So at this point, we officially need, 1, a little bit more structure, but 2, we need some more bikes. So the first thing we're going to do is actually go get those pictures. So we're going to go to Aprilia. Okay. Here you go. Yep. Okay, so let's go over here. We want the models. We're going to do the Tuono 660. RSV4 is fine. And then Tuono V4. We can do that. So we're going to have 4 bikes on this page. Let's go ahead. Okay. Saving the jazz. Here we go. Topic 2. We are at topic 4. Class example pictures. Okay. So this is a Tuono 660. It's a WebP image. Let's go over here and fix our previous picture. So because it was just named bike, we're going to change that to RS660 just to make our own lives easier so we know what we're addressing. Okay, going to come over here to the RSV4. Clearly we want the factory version, obviously. So we're going to save this image. So we're going to do RSV4 WebP, and then we're going to come over here, and then the 210 V4. So save image as 210 V4. There's that, and now we got our images over here. So there's that. We don't need this anymore. We broke our link here because we changed the name. That is all right. We're going to be making significant changes anyways. So let's come back over here. Instead of Aprilia RS660, we're just going to do Aprilia motorcycles. I'm not sure if, there we go. And the first example I'm going to do is I'm going to do this with Flexbox. So first thing we need is, I'm going to call this Aprilia container. All right. Now I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut here. This is going to be Alt and then up with the up arrow key. And this allows you to move around big chunks of items. Okay. So there is that, and here's another keyboard shortcut. We're going to highlight this, and then we're going to Control Alt and down, and this is going to copy what we have highlighted here. So we're going to need 3 more copies of this. 1, 2, hey, stop it. My fault. So Alt and Shift down, 1, 2, 3. So there is that. We got the RS660 container. We have, need to change this to 210 660 container. We're going to call this RSV4 container, and then 210 V4 container. Okay, so there's that. This is not bike anymore. This is RS660. This is, we have the RS660. We want 210 660 right next to it. So there's that. Hey, stop it, stop it. I don't want, here we go. Hey. Okay. Then we're going into the RSV4, and then let's go to 210 V4. Okay, so there's our images. We can minimize that at the moment. So there's our save, and now we got this going on here. Now remember from last time that we shrank this container by 50%. So we're going to have to fix that now. And we're also going to make this smaller. So there's that. We go back over here. Let's open this up. We're going to have to open up styles again. So there's that. Let's close this. Okay. So I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut for comments. It was Control K, Control C. So there's that. We're going to do global here. Control K, Control C. And then we're going to do desktop, tablet, and mobile. Okay, so what's happening here is that we're building up a little bit of a framework of, hey, here's all the things that we're going to use in multiple places. Here's the global stuff that we're going to use. Once this gets big enough, it might be advisable to throw this into a different file. Desktop, okay. There is a theory out there, pretty strong at this point, where you should be designing for mobile first. Now, this, I would say, is only true is if you're going to be using, if your users are going to use it mobile. And what I mean by that is if your primary demographic is going to visit your site mobile, then yeah, design mobile first. But for our instance here, it doesn't really matter because no one's going to use it. So here's desktop, and to be clear, there are a significant number of web apps that are still used on desktop as a primary device. Your e-commerce, your general information sites, like those type of things should be designed mobile first. But something like this, and if we're doing this for real, your Aprilia Motorcycles website, yeah, you might want to design that mobile first because there's going to be a good chunk of people, if not the majority of people, mobile viewing on your site. So there's that. We need to, well, officially we can save this, and again, we don't have any style. So we're back to where we were a couple lectures ago with this picture being way too big. And these ones are not nearly as big, and that is fine. So what we're going to do here is we're going to set this up a little bit better. So class container, okay, we're going to copy this now. Okay, there's that. I'm going to paste it and stop and paste. So now that we have the class of container there, we can also, instead of ID of image, so this is a good point that I'm kind of glad I stumbled into. You can have multiple IDs on the DOM. It is highly frowned against. It is against practice. It is against, well, best practice. It will work. You shouldn't do it though. This really should be a class, all right? And the reason for this is when you go search for IDs with JavaScript, which we haven't covered yet, it's only going to get the first ID that it finds. So if you have a bunch of things that have multiple IDs of the same thing, you're going to run into problems very, very quickly. So here's a class of image. All right, so we're going to come over here to global. We're going to address that class of image. And then we're going to say we want you to fit within its container, width of 100%. Okay, so notice over to the right or on your screen over here that our images officially fit and they're on top of each other. So we'll get into why that is in a moment. Okay, so I'm going to add a comment here. We are in CSS. Okay. If you haven't noticed yet, CSS comments is the multi-line C language comment system. So your slash, your star, whatever you want inside of that, star and slash. Okay. So this is saying make image fit within container. Make image fit within container. Okay, so to answer the question that I proposed to myself here a couple seconds ago, we have a bunch of images here, but they're all on top of each other. And the keen eye among you would have noticed that an image tag is actually an inline element. So in theory, they should be next to each other, but they're not. And the reason for that is because we wrap these in div containers. So what this div container is saying on the browser level is saying, hey, put a break right here and put a break right here. So even if this image is a inline style element, it's going to look like a block element. So I can demonstrate that real quick. I'm going to add another image here. I'm going to save that. All right, because we're setting this to a width of 100%. Tones. Let's try this. Nope. That should definitely work. Anyways. Yeah, let's make sure I haven't lost my mind here. So image W3C. Yeah, so W3C here is showing that this image is in line. Interesting, interesting. Anyways, problem for another day. Let's go back to what we're doing. Okay, so we're going to save this. We're going to go back. That is still set to 50%. Okay, we want this at 100%. Okay, so there's that. All right, so we got this. What we're looking for at the moment is that we really, well, one, we should label these. So let's go back here. Div. This is RS660. And then we're going to give this a class of bike name. Is that it? There we go. I'm going to copy this. There we go. Class of bike name. These are all RS660 now. That's not going to work. So, 20, no. 660. RS V4. No. V4. Okay. So we're going to need that here in a second. So one of the things that obviously we need to point out is that this isn't very organized at the moment. So let's make this a little bit bigger. Here we go. Now at this point, we can use the width of the screen to actually fill up each individual bike on one row. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So, but we're going to use Flexbox to do that. So let's come over here. Desktop, we're going to use that Aprilia container right here. Aprilia container, display, flex. Okay. So at that point, we could probably leave that there. Okay, and now we're going to need the class of container. Width, we're going to do 25% here because we're trying to get all four up on one row. So there's that. We have everything on one row now. So this isn't the most attractive thing in the world, and really I should be going back and getting the little models they got here going on instead of this actual picture for the RS660. But with that said, it actually allows me to demonstrate a couple of things. So first, we can add some styles to this and to the class itself, and it's going to apply it to all of them, even if you don't see it. So I'm going to do something called border radius. And this is going to add, obviously, a radius to the border, but ultimately it's just going to round the corners. So what I'm going to do here is 20 pixels. This is going to be too much, but it's going to be a dramatic showing of what is supposed to be happening here. So here's that. We have it on the container. That should have rounded the corners on the image. Let's put it on the image. Okay, so it should have inherited, but again, another problem for another day. So right here's the rounded corners on your image. So there's another property that we have there. Now this is still right next to these other images. So I really want to control that container. Right here, I'm going to give it a little bit of padding. And what padding does is essentially within this container, shrink it, right? So margin is the other option here, and this would physically move the container itself. But because we use 25% width on everything, we don't have any margin or space left on that row. So that's going to be a problem. So padding, We'll do 5% here just for dramatic effect. And you can already see over here that it's much smaller. Okay, so there is that. There's our little demonstration here. Now I'm going to reduce this padding just so I have more space. We're going to reduce that to 1, and now we got that. So the other thing I want to do is I want to fix these labels a little bit. So what I'm going to do is go back over here. We want a bike name. Bike name. Oh. Let's do that. Bike name. Text, align, center. Here we go. Again, dramatic effect. So now this is directly over our image. Okay. We also want to make this font bigger. So instead of doing that, let's do 18px. I like 22. So 22px. Okay, now we got our images pretty much squared away. We have our text pretty much squared away. Okay, so with that, now we need to worry about, okay, if we shrink this, if we go smaller, everything gets smaller. And it gets to a point where, especially like this, where the text is going to bump down, and now we got a goofy layout going on. So we need to fix that. And it doesn't look like we're going to need a tablet view, but I'm going to show you how to do it anyways. So media, screen, max width. We're going to do 1,000 pixels here. Nope. Here we go. At 1,000 pixels, we're going to adjust how we're handling this. So what we're going to do, again, for dramatic effect, we're going to make sure that this is going to be on a 2-column layout when we go down to tablet view. So what we're going to have to do is, again, this is the cascading aspect of CSS. We're going to take this container, we're going to copy it, we're going to put it down here, and instead of a width of 25%, we're going to go up to a width of 50%. We're also going to make this padding bigger too. So there's that. Okay, notice that we're still on the 4-column layout, and then this is going to bump down. It is not bumping down. Why not? So this is where, again, guys, troubleshooting is going to be your thing. So, okay, so right there is a big bump. So right there's our breakpoint. What I'm going to do is open up an inspector. I'm actually going to separate this window. I'm going to pull it up here so you guys can see it. There's that. We're going to go into that so we have access to mobile. Okay. Notice that responsive is that big. So we're going to go right at 1,000 pixels. And then we're going to go a little bit above to show what we're trying to accomplish here. So we're at 1,002 pixels right now. So we have width. So we're directly on the image. So class of image. This is helpful. We're addressing container right now. So width of 25%. If I take away width of 25%, of course it's only on that one, that gets significantly bigger. Okay. So there is that. Why, oh why is this happening? So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to 1,000 pixels. Now the container width is officially 50%. I know what I didn't do. I never set the row wrap. So let's go back over here. I know what my mistake was now. Let's come over here, container, display flex. Flex direction, row. Okay, we're at 1,000 pixels. That is not it. Let's come over here. Flex container, transition yourself. Not what I was looking for. Okay, yeah, flex wrap is what I'm missing. There's that. Let's come back over here. Yay! Look what we got. Okay. So there's that flex wrap. We're gonna go down. Okay, so it's not working exactly how we intended it, but it is officially working. So let's bump this up a little bit. Okay, so we need to go find why this is happening. So at 1,001 pixels, what is happening here? So let's inspect this. Let's go back here. With the 25%, these all should be on one row. Okay, so if we're on the layout tab here in inspector tool, and we come down here to box model, this is going to show you exactly what's being applied to it. Now we haven't had a chance to go over this in detail, but here's margin, border, padding, the size of the element itself. Okay, so we have padding here. Let's make sure that you can see it. So we have padding here, highlighted in purple. We have the size of the element itself, highlighted in blue. We have border, it doesn't have any, so it's not coming up, and then margin, which would be yellow. But again, we don't have any margin, so it's not coming up. So if we come up here to Aprilia, which is the Aprilia container, I'm not seeing any margin or padding. I'm going to come up here to body, which is giving me a margin. So if I go to 0 here and 0 here, well, it at least got it there. So again, that's not the problem. And I want to be absolutely clear about this. I don't care how good you get at CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, you're always going to have these type of problems where you're going, why is this not working? And you have to be able to troubleshoot your way through these problems. So we have our container, there's the padding there, we have the brilliant container. This is set to 25%, so I don't know if I lower this, does that work? So at 23% it works. Why not 25? That is the question. So if I take the padding away, the padding seems to be the problem. So the padding, I wonder. So one way we can fix this, now that we know what the problem is, we're going to put this over here. We're going to come back over here. We're going to go max width of 25%. So padding we can still have our padding, we can still have our spacing between all of our elements, our containers in this case. And then max width, we're essentially saying you can be as big as 25%. So whatever space you have left, whatever space is available, you can go up to 25%. So if I save this, and I come back over here, and I come back over here, that should have, let's refresh. And again, that is not working. Interesting. Okay, so for the time being, we're going to move on. So we're going to take padding away. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this by 23%. So we're going to have 2% on either side. We're going to do margin left of 1%, and then margin right of 1%. That should fix our problem, and it does. Okay, so there's that. We have margin now instead of padding. I'm not sure why that didn't work. Should have, but it didn't. So let's go ahead and go back over here. Let's paste this here. We're going to fix this now. Okay, so we're going to do 42% here, and this allows us 2% on either side. Okay, and now we're going to go down to make sure that this breakpoint actually works, and it does. How about that? So this is officially our tablet view for what we're trying to accomplish here, and now we're going to do the same thing for mobile. There's that. And I think what I'm going to do is we're going to leave the margin. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because I want to show you that you don't have to rewrite everything every time. Once it's cascaded down, that property is already set. So this is saying, hey, what are the things that I want to change for mobile view? And well, in this case, it's max width. So max width, if we're going to have 2% on either side, that's going to be 4%. So that's going to be up to 96 for a max width. And then we're going to make this breakpoint at 500 pixels. So anything that's less than 500 pixels, mobile view is going to be active. So we're going to do this. We're going to go to 501 just to show you that we're still going to be in tablet view. There's that. And then we're going to go down 1. And now we're in mobile view because now we have a single column layout. All right. So with that said, that is Flexbox. In the next example, we're going to go over CSS Grid. It's not going to be a full lecture with a PowerPoint, but we're going to have another lab like this just to show you CSS Grid. So I'm going to save this, and then I will see you in the next example. Okay, so welcome back. We're going to go over the CSS Grid example of the previous site that we were working on from last time. And yeah, we had this, and just as a review, we did have this as a Flexbox, which I have down here. If you haven't noticed yet, I made a new folder called CSS Grid inside of the same directory that we were working in before. And then we still have this Flexbox example. So just in case you did not watch the last video that we did, this is what we ended up with. So as we move this over, it adjusts based on breakpoints and changes how many motorcycles are on a single row based on how wide our viewport is. Okay, so what we're going to do is do something very similar with CSS Grid, but I think you're going to notice that CSS Grid is going to make this a lot easier. So let's review Flexbox real quick. So I'm going to open up Styles, CSS, HTML. Okay, so here's our HTML. We have our Aprilia container. We have the containers for each bike. Okay, and then we have the bike name and then the bike picture itself. Okay, so with that said, we're going to go over here and see what the Flexbox standard is looking like here. So here's our Aprilia container. We gave it a display of flex wrap of wrap. Container, we had to set the width to 23% and then margin left and margin right of 1%. So that gives us a little bit of spacing in between our objects. Okay, and then we have our breakpoints down here where we had to reset max width and margins, and then we did max width again for mobile. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to close this and close this and close that. So I'm going to reopen index.html, except for it's going to be in the CSS grid folder. Same thing with index.css. So one thing right off the bat is our structure is going to be the same. Generally, structure gets a lot easier with CSS grid, being that this is pretty simple as it is. We're going to keep it, and mostly because we still need it. So Aprilia container, we're going to have to change that to a display of grid, and then we also I'm going to have to change a couple other things, but we'll get there. So display of grid, we don't need flex wrap anymore. Okay, that is working out for us. We do need to tell it how many rows that we're going to have and how many columns. So columns, we're going to use repeat here. Okay, we're going to use autofill, min max. So this is where we're going to have to talk about how big do we want our object. So I'm going to take a guess here and we can adjust it as we go. I'm going to go 250 pixels. Okay. And then I want each size, if you're going to be bigger than 250 pixels, I want it to be 1FR, so equal sizing for each object. Okay. The next thing that we got to do is we need to set the grid gap. And the reason why we're going to do that is because now we don't really need that container class anymore. So we're going to do grid, come on now, gap. And this is where we're going to use a percentile unit or a relative unit. And I think I'm going to do 0.5 EM here. I'm going to see what that ends up looking like. We do not need container class anymore. We can keep bike name there. That's fine. Actually, let's bring back container class. We're going to give this a background color. And let's make this, we'll make it light gray. I just want to show you what the background is actually going to look like when we're moving this around. Okay, so there's light gray. Bike name can stay the same. And then we do not need either one of these breakpoints. So we're going to do that. Notice that we've auto-updated over here and that we have our container, gray, and we have spacing between all of our objects, again, by grid gap here, so it's done us a pretty good favor here. So also notice that at 250 pixels, we still have a very similar format to what we did before. So if I make this just a little bit bigger, notice that we actually get 3 here now. We could have accomplished this with Flexbox as well, but we would have to make breakpoints anyway, so we might as well control it a little bit better if you're going to use Flexbox. In this case, because we don't need those breakpoints, this is a pretty easy compromise because this makes life a lot easier. So autofill, min max, 250 pixels, and I want them the same size as soon as we're bigger than 250 pixels. So notice that these things keep getting bigger, and then as soon as we get to a point where we get big enough, it keeps making it smaller. So the reason why I'm showing you this here is because there's a setting that we need to change to get to the effect that I actually want. So over here, autofill. So fill is only going to be so big. It's a max of 250 pixels. So we need auto fit here. Okay, auto fit. And notice we don't have that effect anymore. So nice and wide, everything still stays on here. We go down and it's going to wrap. Okay, so we got that. So moving on, I'm going to show this again. I'm going to go back, fill, save. Notice it didn't change. And the only difference is when we get bigger, the max width can be 250 pixels. So there we go. There's your difference between auto fill and auto fit. So we're going to use auto fit because that's the effect that we're looking for. We have container of light gray, and then bike name is exactly the same. So with that said, that's CSS grid. I mean, very simple, of course, and there's a lot more to it, but to achieve the same effect that we did with Flexbox, and it took us a lot longer to do that, we did in 3 lines. So CSS grid is pretty awesome, and in the future, this is probably going to be it. This is probably going to be the layout standard of choice. We'll see. I've been wrong before, but yeah, there's nothing too much to say here. So relatively short video. I wanted to show you guys CSS grid. I'm going to be using CSS grid for the rest of the course unless there's a reason not to. And there's going to be a few reasons not to, because I got to show you guys a few of the libraries that you're probably going to run into. So with that said, I will see you in the next one.